Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our annual planning workshop series. Today is our first of three workshops, which you've all registered for. And today we're talking about the power of a plan on a page. Annual planning is typically the biggest eye roll moment for most B2B marketers, but it doesn't have to be. Not with the right process and data to get it done. But one without the other will only get you so far. So this is the very reason that we've partnered with our friends at Uptempo on this series. A few quick things before we get into it for today. One, we will leave time at the end of today's session for Q&A. So please add your questions during the presentation to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Secondly, we will send out the recording and the slides following today's session. So please check your inboxes tomorrow morning and feel free to share those resources with your team. And then last but not least, after the Q&A session, Uptempo will host a short backstage pass. They'll share a quick overview of what an enterprise marketing planning platform looks like and the benefits of having one place for all your plans and budgets. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. So first we have Kathy Mackey, EVP of Innovation and co-founder of Inverta. Also from Inverta, we have Shelly Kaleza, our VP of Account Management. And last, but certainly not least, they are joined today by Jim Williams, CMO at Uptempo. Well, that's about enough for me until we get to the Q&A session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to get us kicked off.
Okay, well, thank you, Jessica. As Jessica said, you're probably here because you're in the throes of annual planning. And I don't know if I'd say eye roll. I like to say it's one of the critical, let's say, stress-inducing, time-consuming, deadline-driven, daunting projects that we all have to do once a year. I mean, that's how it is. And unless you've worked for a company where you perhaps had an executive leadership team that was especially skilled at planning, or you were fortunate enough to have a veteran CMO take you under their wing, you probably were never taught how to do effective planning. It's a job that I think, a skill we all learn on the job. And every annual plan we do, we hopefully get a bit better at it. But learning how to plan, how to select a strategy, how to allocate budget, how to get everyone on the same page is a skill that every successful CMO or aspiring CMO needs to master. And so I think annual planning is a bit of an art and a science. You know, we have to start to look at the competitive landscape, what lies ahead, where does the company expect to get their revenue, what are the segments, what are the products, do you have enough people, budget, programs to actually execute on your goals? And those are all questions you have to answer in your annual plan. And there are no, what I would say, Jim, you've been there many times, no right or wrong answers, but there are consequences if you don't choose well. And so what we're here today is to actually share the lessons I think we've learned as we've done annual plan over the years. And just to start out, what an annual plan is a blueprint to basically align your team and show how marketing is going to be connected to the business goals. It should be very clear on that plan what it is you're doing and what you are not doing for the year. It's a great way to set expectations with your organization. The other beauty of it is a great way to articulate to your team what they're working towards. You know, what are they doing? What are they contributing to the overall business goals? And also gives them the gift of focus. Otherwise, your team can just start doing what we call random acts of marketing. This gives them the gift of focus. It also gives you a framework to actually hold people accountable. Every meeting you have, every QBR should be, how are you contributing? What are your programs? What are you doing to contribute to these business goals? Because I tell you, if you do not put this rigor and build a strong annual plan, sales will start to dictate what marketing should be doing. Budgeting and finance will start to limit your funding until you can tell them what you're going to be doing. And I will tell you, just mastering the art of planning is a win in itself, because there's not one plan you're going to put together end of December that you're going to actually do the entire year. Things change on the ground. So many things just change between one year and the next. And if you know how to plan, you will know how to pivot and adapt as necessary. So just mastering this art of planning is a win in itself.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. And I do think that planning really helps you clarify that thinking. So I think you have to think about what are the key objectives in the coming year for our organization. If you don't have those, you need to find them. You really need to understand, like, how am I going to work backwards from those goals? And I would say, let's start at the end, like with the end goal in mind, and then work backwards into how you think you're going to get there. And you really need to spend time also looking at your current plan. Like, what have we been working on that is actually something we need to double down on in this coming year because it's working and it's driving the right results that tie back to my business goals. But we also need to be real about the things that aren't working and take them off. And if they're not working, why are they not working? Maybe we just need to shift or change. So really be thoughtful about dealing in reality. And it's not the time to like fool yourself on that past performance. And like, what is my team capable of? And what MarTech do I really have in place to do this in a scalable way? Like, be real with yourself about the team's capabilities, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to deliver on the plan that you put in place. So it has to be actionable. I think that moves us on to really talking about a shared language. How are we going to make sure that the terms that we're using, and I know this sounds pretty elementary, but we think everybody understands what it is that we're saying. And we've been doing marketing for a long time, and marketers tend to speak the same language. But your stakeholders, while they may be shaking their head yes, probably have no idea what you're talking about. They don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. So I think it's really an important time to go down to the basics, to say, hey, let's align on our terminology. And when we're talking about a campaign, this is what I mean by that. I mean, it's not an email campaign, it's not an event campaign, it's a multi-channel orchestration that's driving towards this marketing goal. And being specific about that. Because the other thing that it's going to do is it's going to lay the foundation for how you communicate your progress throughout the year. So you want to make sure that you're speaking that same language so that it's not a false alignment, that when you are saying something, you are speaking the same language and you're throwing away and reducing these misunderstandings and really improving communication, not only with your stakeholders, but also with your team. Like, don't assume that your team understands. Make sure that you are aligning on a common terminology. And then a good plan is only good if people agree with it. So this is one of the critical things I think when it comes to annual planning, and probably sometimes one of the most difficult. This plan is intended to say, this is what I'm signing up for. This is what I'm committing marketing to deliver for the year. And if you don't have agreements with the highest levels of your organization, then you're going to have difficulty the entire year trying to stay focused and not giving in to those random acts of marketing that come around. And what we're going to talk through is actually a tool that you can leverage that's going to be something not only that you can get alignment and agreement on, but it's also going to be something that you're going to continually pull up every time you have a conversation with these stakeholders to say, just to anchor you back, this is what we're working towards. This is what we all agreed to. And the other thing it's going to do while you're trying to get this alignment is it's going to bring up either challenges that, by the way, are easier to combat at this point than, mid-year. they're going to be less disruptive. So it's going to bring up really meaningful conversations that I think you should be having. It's going to give them an opportunity to feel like they've contributed to your strategy. So you're going to get better alignment with them because they're going to feel like they helped you distill it to this plan. So I think at the end of the day, plans are always going to change, and they do sometimes. But this tool gives you the ability to go, okay, this is what we said we were going to do at the beginning of the year. We did agree to it. I understand X has changed. How might we we can't, typically you can't be additive because you've already got, set budgets, set resources available to you, but it does give you a place to have a trade-off conversation. So again, be sure that your stakeholders understand this plan, and Kathy's getting ready to sort of share how you can consolidate that into a plan that really not only you can get alignment on, but it also will drive the execution for the entire team throughout the year. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Kathy.
So what is an annual plan? This is a plan on a page, but this is the end result of your annual plan. Your annual plan takes weeks and months of work you're putting into it. This is the distillation of all the research you've done, the strategy discussions you've had, the scenario planning you've done with your team, the back and forth with finance, and what you should end up with. Because if you don't get it down to what we call this plan on a page, you will not have a way to effectively communicate to the organization, to your own team, and to the rest of the organization what it is you're doing. And let me explain what each column is here. So the first one is, your business goals. That's what the company wants to achieve. But for the next one, marketing initiatives, that's what translates into how you're going to support the business. How are you going to contribute? The approach then is what's the strategy you're going to take to support those business goals. The marketing goals are where you outline what are you going to do? What does success look like? This is the measurable part. Like, what are the actual things you're going to do? Key actions are how you're actually going to execute on this. What are the things you're going to do to make this a reality? Dependencies and risks, what are the things that need to be addressed for this to be successful? And then you add on budget, like what are you going to assign, whether it's a percent or a dollar number. But this is how you can actually communicate easily to the organization. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. Here's how we're going to measure ourselves. Here are the things we're actually doing day to day. And here are the things that could possibly put it at risk if these things don't come together. And so what this looks like on step one is you need to get business goals. The business goals are what are the levers the company is going to use to grow this year? What are the big changes that are happening? Where do they expect to get their revenue? Those are the things that you need to get from the company. What are the things they want to do? What do they want to achieve this year? But at that same time, you can be doing your homework. You need to start digging into what were the pipeline and revenue trends we saw last year? Like, did you sell to a lot of companies? And at the end of the day, we sold to a lot of them, but they only contributed a small amount to your revenue. Did you have the wrong ICP? What are the things you can start learning from what you did this year? Start looking at the competitive landscape. Are there any new products coming out from your competitors? Are there things happening you need to be aware of in the industry? Not only in your own industry, but in your customers' industry, so you know what's top of mind with them. Look at your past campaign performance. Like Shelley said, what do you want to start, continue, stop? What did you learn last year? And probably more importantly now for marketers, B2B buyers have changed how they're buying. How is your marketing strategy going to address all those changes we've seen and how they actually select and choose a vendor these days? So you've got to get your business goals first and start thinking about what you learned to say how you're going to support them this year. An example business goals could be the company's business motto. Establish this motto as a visionary leader within the security industry. That has marketing initiative written all over it. Next one, grow sales to 125 million with our cloud security solution. Now you probably want to get a little more detail on that, but I'll tell you, there are some business goals that are always going to have revenue. This is your revenue one, your pipeline targets. Grow your indirect channel sales to 15 million. Well, that's a good one, but you need to figure out how is marketing supposed to contribute to that? You know, get clarity around that. And our last one, ensure our company attracts and retains the best talent. This is what came out from the corporate leaders. Not all of them are always have revenue targets with them, but all these are going to need a way to show success. So for instance, the first one, establish as a visionary leader within the security industry, that may be you show up in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the first time. Or to make sure your company, your group attracts and retains your best talent, do you have a goal of something like, we have less than 15% regrettable attrition? So I'll start to get into these a bit more. But a lot of times things don't always go the way you planned. And so a lot of times you'll start this and the business goals aren't quite finalized. Well, let me tell you, I don't know any business that says, well, we did this revenue last year. Jim, you did such a great job. Take 15% off next year. You know, just slow down. Your team's working too hard. Assume your revenue goals are going to grow. So just assume there's a 10 or 15% growth on that. Typically, how marketing supports the business is there's usually some type of brand goal. You'll have something like awareness, reputation, positioning. You're going to have some pipeline and revenue targets. And sometimes it's something around your staffing, organization, or infrastructure. So you can start to figure out what are your business goals. Even if they're not finalized, you'll have some general direction. Finance hasn't provided you guidance. Well, that actually could be a gift. You've all been working, I don't know any CMOs that's not doing scenario planning right now. Start to build a strong business case and go to finance saying, if this is the impact you want us to have, here's the type of budget I need. But this is where you can start having those conversations. Your revenue number doesn't have specifics like the one I showed you, 125 million in sales. Well, what segments, what geos, what solution sets? Like how are we supposed to, what's a net new? What's going to be a cross sell? What would be all these coming in from renewals? This is where you cannot do your annual plan in a vacuum. You've got to get with your peers, your sales leader, your product leader. Get with your sales leader and figure out where their revenue number is coming from. Your product leader, let's say a part of your revenue, excuse me, is supposed to come from new product launch in June. And then when comes May, they're like, we're not going to hit it till September. What is your backup plan to make up for that potential revenue shortfall? Like this is what goes into it. And the last one, oh my God, my competitive intelligence analyst is on maternity leave. There is always stuff that's going to go wrong as you start planning. You do not just get this perfectly handed to you. You've got to have contingencies planned. You've got to do your homework to say what happened last year and learn from it, and then move forward. Your plan is always going to be in flux, but you've got to present something to the board typically in December. You've got to figure this out. And you've got to start having those conversations now. You can't do your plan in a vacuum. So Shelley, back over to you with some of the details.
So, right, like all of this sounds great, but how do we actually do that? Because you certainly don't start your plan with a plan on a page. There is actually you're not going to get away from having to do the exercise with your team to understand how you're going to actually achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. You will still have to have the larger decks, but this will give you a mechanism to roll that deck up because nobody wants to look at your 150-page deck. Like it's overwhelming. They won't understand it. You've got to synthesize it into this plan on a page in order to get that critical buy-in. So how do you actually do that? And I thought we'd just walk through a bit of an example to double click into each of those boxes that Kathy just gave you the high level on. So if you press click, Kathy, I think it'll build as we talk about each one of these. So remember your business objective. This is an example. So it is an example of one that might come from the highest level. Like the organization needs to grow their SaaS platform by their sales by 25%, which equates to about $10 million. So that's the business goal. Then if we look at the marketing initiative aligned to that, it might be, okay, marketing actually is going to grow a pipeline because in order to get to 10 million, we have to support a larger pipeline to get to that. So we are going to look specifically at growing pipeline on solution A. So that is our marketing initiative. The approach that we are going to take in order to achieve that is we're going to grow, we're going to partner with our hunter team to make sure that they drive growth across these really critical key strategic accounts. And we're also going to expand current accounts. So we're going to partner with our account managers on the solution A, as like we're going to identify which accounts this is their next best purchase. So we're going to create trials for that. So that's our approach. Then if we break that into the goals that we want to achieve, these have to be, remember, they have to be measurable and quantifiable. So the goals attached to that might look something like, I'm going to drive 2 million sourced and 5 million influenced net new pipeline for this solution. And that would align to your grow approach. And then I'm going to get 75% of my current accounts with solution A as their next best purchase to sign up for trials. So that could be, that's your goal attached to your expansion approach. And then if you move on, like what are the key actions that I have to do or team has to do as a marketing team to support those? Well, we're going to build a ABM program that is focused more on one to few and on those technical decision buyers, because that is where we feel like we're going to drive that the most impact to that goal. And then we also have to build a trial program for the solution. So those are the key things we have to do. And then what are our risks or dependencies? Well, we have to have market research that actually validates what our technical decision maker challenges are, so that we develop good, messaging that will actually engage and drive towards the goals. And we also have to have access to our marketing automation operations team and SME resources, so we can actually build that trial program that's going to support that goal. So this is how it sort of extrapolates across those columns. But the one column that I did leave off is actually budget, because it's a much bigger conversation. So I'm going to pass the torch over to Jim and let him, oh, hold on, before I do that, let me talk about the things that can go wrong, because there's always something that's going to go wrong, right? Like
it could go wrong on my
early.
slides too.
Well, things that could go wrong are, guess what? Your team is heads down. They're thinking about, how am I going to finish the year strong? What do I do? Like, how do I get my team to focus? Well, you really do have to think about that, because they have to put their brains to the coming year, and they do still have to execute against Q4. So things you might consider are like, don't think about starting net new campaigns that you've never done before that require a lot of heavy lift in Q4. Like, reserve those for, the beginning of the year. Don't reinvent the wheel on things that you're doing. Like, let things move that are actually performing and maybe amp up on those things. So that's one thing. Another thing that can go wrong is that the data that you have is actually not giving you the right insights that you need in order to develop a strong and meaningful plan. And I think this is definitely a big challenge. And I think it is a challenge that you really do need to make sure that you're giving your people who are responsible for collecting that data, that you're giving them the right kind of guidance. Like, tell them, this is what I'm trying to answer, versus telling them what data to pull. Be sure that you bring them in and say, these are the kinds of answers that are questions that I have, and I'm trying to answer them. How do we answer those with data? So give them that context. That will really help make sure that you've got the right data in order to answer those critical questions as it relates to your plan. And then finally, your marketing leadership team, they may just not be aligned with you. So this is one that you really need to make sure that you're sitting down and helping them understand the bigger picture and bring them into alignment with what their role will be in helping you achieve these goals. So you want to bring them along. You don't want to dictate your plan to them. That is definitely the number one way not to get alignment. So you want alignment not only with your stakeholders that are outside of marketing, you have to have alignment with that leadership team because that's who you're depending on to make sure that they are driving to this plan throughout the year. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jim to talk about how you think about budget as it relates to your plan.
Thanks, Shelley. I appreciate it. Yeah, this is the interesting part, right? Because budgets and dollars are the fuel, right? Like it's the fuel for marketing. You can have all the plans in the world, but if it's not resourced, and resourcing typically comes down to dollars, whether you're buying people, talent, ideas, or media, it's going to be challenging. So I love this slide. I'm going to walk through this build slide. I love it, and it is not my slide. It is actually from Forrester. If you've ever read any of Forrester's planning guidelines, buried in the research from a guy named Craig Moore is this thing which they call the strategic budget allocation model. And for me, it's eye-opening. And every time we put it in front of marketing leaders, it kind of, at first is like, oh, that's not really the way I look at the budget, but then it kind of starts to resonate because it ties directly back to the plan on the page, defending and resourcing the plan on the page. So many marketers, like myself, for many years, went into the new year planning by saying, here is last year's budget. I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to shift some dollars around, and I'm going to come up with what the new budget looks like. And that budget was typically built by saying, I'm going to spend this much in brand, this much in demand, this much in product marketing, this much in field marketing, this much in content marketing, this much in whatever. Like, have those things. You might shift the dollars between them. It's like, oh, we need to do a little bit more demand, but I'm going to put a little bit more money here. And that is the plan that's going to fund your plan on a page, your financial plan. And there's real flaws to that. A better approach, which Forrester kind of came up with, is start with taking 100% of your budget. Because when you're working on your plan on a page, your budget has already, for the most part, been allocated. It probably was allocated as part of a 3-year strategic plan, not even an annual plan, which said over 3 years, this is what we're going to allocate across the business to drive growth, business objectives. And if we benchmark marketing to that, it's going to be, as a tech company, 8 to 10%. Maybe, or maybe it's 15% if you're in a different industry. If you're CPG, it might be as high as 20%, right? This is the dollar amount roughly that you're going to get. So that has been somewhat determined. It could fluctuate one or another. But if you take that 100% of budget and you start to divide it among what is actually going to be spent for marketing meaning pushing ideas into the market to reach an audience to convince them they have a problem that can be solved. It actually is going to end up with probably 45% if you look at kind of allocations, right? Roughly do 1-to-1. It might be, 2-to-1 between programs and headcount. It really depends on the size of the business you're in, but roughly, let's say headcount and marketing programs are equally split between that. And then there's MarTech, which 5% I think is conservative these days, is typically north of that, and non-program services. Okay, stuff that marketing has to pay for that hasn't a lot. It does not have a lot to do with marketing. Take that, just lay that out. It gives you a rough proxy for what do I have to spend to hit the annual plan. Then if you move ahead, the next step is rather difficult. Instead of going down the path of dividing your marketing dollars into functional areas or departmental spend, start to think about what dollars are going to be taken right out of the campaigns we just talked about, going to get pushed to non-campaign spend. Things that you can't directly attribute to one of those corporate objectives that you're going to run a campaign behind. That might be the website because it serves the entire business, but you got to invest in it. Or it might be an annual event, or sometimes it's corporate communications or PR, etc. These are out of campaign spending. Take that dollar amount, put it aside, and try and allocate no more than 30% to that. because the other 70%, if you move ahead, should be squarely oriented towards those campaigns. Each of the lines that you have in your annual plan, that last column says dollars. This is to determine the dollars that go against those. Now, immediately, this is like, my team's not going to like this. Field marketing was expecting a 10% increase in their budget from last year. And how do I show this with this campaign spending? Well, it does a couple of really beneficial things when you allocate your dollars this way. All right. Number one, it keeps the entire team focused on the objective, focused on the plan on the page, right? You want to grow this segment by 15%. You want to enter the insurance market. You want to build a category and be recognized. Those are the things the team needs to focus on, not how many leads did I get? What is my pay-per-click price point? You know, how many field events did I do? Did I create all this great content? But like the purpose, why are you doing those things? It's to hit these corporate objectives, which come down to these campaign themes. Then underneath that, you can start to segment a campaign into the audiences, the geos it supports, the products it supports, the use cases, etc. So you kind of organize it this way. It also allows you to answer the question you're going to get after you go through this whole annual planning. An executive is going to show up in 3 months and say, hey, you said we were going to build a category. How much money are you spending to build a category? And if you haven't thought about it this way, you're going to go through all types of spreadsheets, gymnastics to try and add up a bunch of dollars that are being spent out of departments to answer that question. The other thing it does, it keeps you focused on the balance. A lot of times you can get lost in the balance between working spend versus non-working spend. And that's much more of a B2C term. A better way to think about it in B2B is content spend versus demand spend, right? It costs money to build ideas and content thought leadership, but you have to pump that through channels. That's your demand spend. And you want to kind of maintain that ratio. And this helps to do that, because otherwise the content team just goes and creates content without a purpose. And the demand team goes and buys media spend, media placement without knowing what's going to go through that media. So it kind of keeps those things aligned. And then finally, I think it's really interesting because at the end of the day, what you want to be able to show is your performance against the higher level campaigns, not your performance by channel. You want to get to what was the ROI for the campaign that meant to help us enter this new market. What does that look like? How is that doing against what the targets were? So a different way to think about your budget allocation process, you want to get to this campaign spend. It's challenging to get there, but it helps you. It comes right off the plan on a page, helps you to start to sort those dollars so that when your team comes back with campaign ideas and plans and their requests for investments, you can do that interlock and quickly see this idea doesn't really tie to the plan on a page at all. So it's not going to get funded. If you jump ahead to the next slide, this is another reason why this is important, because when you do get your budgets from the finance team, and when you do your regular reconciliation on a quarterly basis, sometimes a monthly basis, you're going to get a big list of spend items with a bunch of codes that make 0 sense to you. They're going to say, here are all the expenses you did in the month, or here's all the dollars. And they're tagged to things like, oh, travel and entertainment, marketing expenses, professional services, office expenses, things that marketers don't think about. Like, is that a professional services? No, that's our analyst program, which is part of our branding initiative in order to build a category. But they call it professional services, which doesn't make a lot of sense to you. Now, finance teams have to do that because they rely on systems, just like we have our own systems of record that are focused on closing the books, right? Financial reporting and tax and accounting purposes. That's why they code all these things. So very early on, when you're creating the plan on the page, it's important to sit down with the finance team and come up with a shared language. And just as Kathy and Jess referred to earlier, a shared language between how finance sees the world and how marketing sees the world. Because you want to keep marketers oriented towards those campaigns and the programs that support it. And finance doesn't think about campaigns or audiences or geos or products or any of that stuff. They just think about tax and accounting. So that earlier conversation is an interlock to say, when you say these things, on my view of the world, they're going to line up to these categories such that I can roll those up and see how much am I actually spending on the campaigns that support the plan on the page. Really, really important to do. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to you.
So now we've got our plan on a page. So this is where we have to move into getting that buy-in. So you've already had a lot of these collaborative sessions with your stakeholders, with your team, etc. But now is a more formalized way of getting that sign off. So the first thing I would say is in all marketing, like know your audience. So you have to adjust your talk track. You have to know, who am I going to get this buy-in from, and how do I adjust, like what are they interested in and what are they going to care about, and anticipate challenges that you think that they're going to bring up so that you're ready to answer those tough questions that you might get. By the way, you will guaranteed get, and be confident about how you're actually going to answer them. And because you have already brought them along on this journey, they are going to be more apt to understand, like, this wasn't just an exercise I did in 2 hours to put on a page to get your buy-in. This was a thoughtful process, and there was a lot of consideration and a lot of collaboration that went into getting here. And unfortunately, that is not something we're going to be able to support in the coming year because X, Y, and Z. So be confident when you go into those, customize them. And remember, this is just a tool. So this page should speak for itself. It shouldn't have to have your talk track. You should be able to send it on. However, you might, I say it's one page, but you might consider having a little bit of an annual pitch deck to support how you deliver this to people so that you can sort of hone in and be really customized in how you illustrate how you arrived at it. You want them to understand the thinking and the detail that went into it without having to get too much into the minutia in your 150-page deck. So let's say maybe you have a 10-page deck that can help support in telling the story to get this buy-in. So there's a lot that we've talked about here, and I'm sure that a lot of people are saying, so how long is this going to take me to do? How much time should I be spending? So Kathy, I think you have a slide that walks us through a timeline.
Yes. So this is the general timeline, but think about, 5 or 6 months out, your executive team, usually informed by investors or stakeholders, are putting together basically the corporate objectives. And it could be things around cost efficiencies, entering new markets, launching a new product. What are those growth targets they're looking for? Once that is done, that's when the marketing planning process kicks off. But during that time, as I said, you should be doing all your homework. You should be looking at, how do my campaigns perform? What did I learn from my audiences? What's that competitive landscape? Doing all that at the same time. Once it kicks off, though, that's when you get your MLT together, your marketing leadership team. This is a collaborative. This is not the CMO doing this in a vacuum. You need input from your digital team, from your product team, from your campaigns team, from your brand team. Everyone needs to contribute to this, and everyone needs to understand how they all tie together. Once you go through and have a lot of that first pass, here are high-level program strategies we're going to settle on, you need to get with finance. Like Jim said, this is who funds it all. And as he said, they speak one language, we speak another. So you've got to be in sync with them. They think of marketing as a cost center. So this is the only way to get the necessary funding you need. And so you've got to work through that with finance. Once you have that, you're usually back with your team, you're doing some more iterations, and then you need to go back to your executive team. And this is an iterative process because they have growth goals they need to hit, and you have financial constraints. And this is where this back and forth happens. So from, here are the big corporate goals, here's marketing contributing, here's where you tie off with finance, and here's where you tie off with your executive team with finance involved. Once you get there is where you think of that as almost like, that's the top down. Campaign plan is where you do the bottom up more. Now, here are our big goals. Digital team, start getting out those spreadsheets. Like, What type of media plan? What are the events we have going on? What does campaigns need? This is where you start really looking at, and top down has to meet bottom up. This is where a lot of that negotiation starts to happen. Once that is done, it's not an easy exercise. And sometimes you just hope for some magic to happen in there, but comes together. You've got to socialize these plans. I've seen too often where you spend a lot of time with that and people look at it as, whoa, glad I got that done. And it goes back in the Google Drive and no one looks at it again. Everyone goes, oh, good, now I'll go back to, I do 5 webinars a quarter. It's like, this is to drive action and how you're actually going to support those goals. I cannot tell you, spending more time in the socialization is key, but it doesn't end there. You're constantly monitoring that. What's changed on the ground? Is there a new competitor? We didn't hit our pipeline number this quarter. You are looking at those programs and you're adapting as you go. And there's a thing Jess and I have talked about, I call Q1, Q5. This is an ideal world. Sometimes you don't get your budget till February. You don't really have those goals until March. You've got to be doing stuff. So like Shelley talked about, that end of your crunch, this should be more rinse and repeat. Like, what did you do in Q4 that you could continue into Q5 or Q1, as it officially is, while you're learning and finalizing your plan? And so you've just got to be flexible. And like I said at the beginning, mastering the art of planning is the big win here, because you're going to be pivoting throughout the year. Things just change. And so what I'm going to get to, why it's important to have this plan on a page. When you have that, it's like print it out. It's like a photo. Every team member should have that somewhere on their desk, because it's the way you're going to communicate and maintain alignment. It's so they know what they're working on for the year. Like, that is so key. It's where you have interlock. It's how you keep everyone on the same page. It also helps with Shelley talked about pushback from your stakeholders. Well, what about my product? What am I supposed to do? Here's what we agreed to. Here's what's happening. It also gives you means to defend not only with your sales leaders when they're changing suddenly their audiences, but what I call EBIs, and everyone's had them, executive bright idea. Your CEO was on a plane. They read a book. They met another exec. They're doing this. We need to do this. And it gives you a way just to have that conversation and say, well, we have this plan. Where does this fit in? What goal does this achieve? Or what am I going to remove if we're going to do that? This comes up all the time, because how hard can marketing be? Everyone has great ideas about how to do marketing. It also drives that measurement. Like I said, how do you hold your team accountable? This is the plan. Every meeting, how are you contributing? How are your programs contributing these goals? And then, as I said, stuff happens. It's easy to change that plan on a page to say, we're not doing this, or here's the adjustment we're making, and getting everyone new. You're never going to get out that 100 slide and get anyone on the same page with you. So that's why plan on a page. This is all about communication alignment. And with that, Jess, I'm going to open up to you for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathy, Shelley, and Jim, for all those excellent insights. Although I'm sure Jim has never had one of those EBIs before and tortured his marketing team.
They were mine.
Trying to execute on them. Come on, Jim.
And your team is saying, no, Jim, we're not doing that.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And, I do think a key takeaway is that even with the best laid plans, if that alignment isn't there cross-functionally, your plan isn't going to be worth much, right? Like, if you as the CMO have insularly developed a plan, right, that you think is perfect, but it hasn't been vetted with the rest of the organization, it's probably not going to amount to much. So, while those are hard conversations and it takes a long time, it's well worth it to ensure your success in 2025. So, all right, with that, some of you have already submitted some questions. If you haven't yet, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section down below. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. But before I do that, really quickly, a brief reminder after the Q&A. So give us about 7 minutes or so here for Q&A. We will have that backstage pass look at Uptempo. So make sure you stay with us through that, and we'll go from there. So, all right. So our first question, guys, and I'm going to let you guys duke it out over who answers what. But the first question we have was, how do you justify and defend marketing programs that don't tie to revenue, but are critical to do. I think a little bit of that, Jim, you covered in kind of, yes, there's the program spend, but there's the non-program, and what does that look like? Some are pet projects of your senior executives. It doesn't necessarily have the proper measurement, right? Brand should be measured against brand, right? All of that type of stuff. How do you really, defend those marketing programs that aren't, bringing in the revenue directly?
Go for it, Jim.
Oh, I'll take a crack at that. So I actually think that the plan on the page is the means to defend that, right? Like the plan on a page isn't just a statement of what you intend to do. It's actually a statement of what you're going to measure. And not every one of those core objectives is going to be measured by revenue, right? Like you're trying to create a category so that you can drive more revenue, but the measurement of creating a category is not necessarily on dollars sold. It might be on number of organic searches that people are doing for that category name. It might be people mentioning that category in their LinkedIn titles. It might be the number of analyst briefings where they're mentioning it. It might be third-party articles like share of voice, all types of things that you might want to measure. You have to figure out what metrics you're going to track to indicate the definition of done against an objective, but it's not always ROI. And when someone comes back and says 3 months in, like, why are we spending so much time on these influencers? You go back to plan on the page and say, because influence get people talking about ideas, and ideas talking, that becomes a metric we're tracking against this objective.
Love it. All right, next question, kind of on the same lines, a little bit about ROI and improving the value of this plan. We got a question from Megan of, it sounds like this approach will benefit from different ways of measuring ROI. Do you have a list of KPIs and ways of measuring ROI given this change in perspective and approach? And I think you were kind of getting there, Jim, with a little bit of like, that's the point of this plan, right? You have to establish those different metrics and stuff up front. But anything else to add to that?
Well, first thing, not to do marketing, but I can't help myself. Like, this is the first of 3 workshops that we're doing with Inverta. I'm delighted to do. This is the annual planning one. We also have a campaign planning one that's coming. And then we're going to have one which is called measuring the plan, measuring the success of the plan, which is going to focus a lot on KPIs, because it's like it's bigger than the table of elements, the number of things you can measure in marketing, right? And just like Maslow has its hierarchy of needs, there is a hierarchy of KPIs. So we're going to dig into KPIs that you can use to measure different outcomes, not all of which, again, are return on investment.
Perfect. All right. Next question we have, and this one's from a annual planning newbie. This is my first year with this, and I'm clinging to this guide with all of my fingernails. I love that for you. And best of luck. But, do you have any other advice for someone thrown into the deep end with the kind of supervisory support that boils down to, I have faith in you? Kathy or Shelley, what kind of advice would you give to a first timer who's leading annual planning?
Shelley, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that may be coming from someone who has no understanding of what marketing does to support business objectives. So I think a great way to start is to say, like, go ahead and take this plan on a page and take the examples and say, hey, this is how I plan to put forward what marketing is going to do this year. Like, this is the way I'm going to frame it. And I want you to understand, I need to make sure that I understand these business objectives so that I can communicate them to my team. And we can put together an actionable plan that is actually going to get something done. And it's not going to be, you have faith in me. It's going to be, you have alignment with me, and you're going to support the marketing team in order to deliver these results. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to go in to setting yourself up for success as you go into the planning season that we're in the midst of.
Really fair point, Shelley. I think that educating your boss,
right,
sometimes, is that first step that a lot of people probably don't think about.
Yeah.
All right, last question here, because we do want to get to our backstage pass from the folks at Uptempo. So can you speak a bit more about team socialization? What do you recommend so that the plan doesn't get buried on the within the drive?
I actually have a
Shelley.
great example of this.
Go, Shelley.
In a previous role, where I led a team, we actually pulled together like a bit of a tiger team for people who wanted to do something above and beyond their normal day-to-day job and something fun. And we basically threw it at them and said, how we threw the problem. How do we keep this in front of our team so that this is always what they're thinking about and that we're reinforcing these goals throughout the year? And the team actually came up with a bit of an internal campaign that was attached to each goal, and they aligned it with like a candy theme. And every month there was a different kind of candy that got delivered to their desk, along with reinforcing the goal that was associated with. And so everyone was always anticipating what's the next fun thing that I'm actually going to get surprised with on my desk. And not only did it stay throughout the year, it literally stayed on people's desks for multiple years because it actually stuck with them. So make it fun and make it something that's not so daunting. You might be surprised at what your team comes up with.
And that falls under internal communication, no
That's
ROI
right.
tied directly
That's
to it.
right.
But totally worth it.
Perfect.
That is right.
All right. Well, I hate to cut you guys off. Great insights, but once again, please join us for the next 2 workshops. But for the last 8 minutes here, we're going to turn it over to Stephanie from Uptempo to give us that backstage pass. So Kathy, if you could stop sharing, and Stephanie, take it away.
Stop sharing.
All right, so I will take the ball and let's kind of see this come to life. So we're going to start by putting together our plans and let's lay the groundwork for our annual planning. So let's say it's time for those workshops. We're building out those plans, you're discussing your initiatives, and you're getting your plans ready so that marketing can submit them for approval. Your plans can be built in the format that aligns with how your teams think about planning. So for example, within your plans, you might have different initiatives. Within those initiatives, you might have perhaps some high-level programs within those. You can create multiple layers, control the naming conventions, and you'll be collecting different information at the different levels. At one level, it might make sense to just collect some basic details. What's the fiscal year we're planning for? What about some competitive details? Maybe the next layer down, you're capturing things like, well, what are our objectives and our goals? All this keeps the information very clean, very easy to consume, and it's very simple for marketers to build out these very complex plans. Now, at this level of planning, you're going to want to earmark some funds. Planning for what you think you're going to be spending on these plans. It's a very simple exercise, as simple as tagging the estimated costs. When we get into the campaign planning and the execution in the next workshop, this can go down to a very specific line item level to say, at a granular level, this is exactly what we're going to be spending on these campaigns. And from here, any of our programs that are nested within our initiatives, we get a very clear visual of that budget roll up. Now, in our planning cycle, you've built out your plans, you're supporting the global subject matter experts, but these plans do need to go through a submission. So they've been refined, marketing's ready to submit these for approval. Approvals can be built into the solution. Because this is a strategic plan, or we're getting ready for annual planning, it needs to go through an approval before it can actually be utilized. So you can control the steps, the routing, who signs off. Those approvers can approve or deny. They can send this back with comments. Any additional details can be captured here. Gives full visibility into the status of these approvals. Now, the owners and any other details as required as part of that submission can all live here and brought back over into the planning view. Now, typically, marketing would have a strategic plan, They produce it in PowerPoint manually. With Uptempo, it's much easier to build these plans and then produce that PowerPoint with a very simple click of a button. So think one click, all of your plan details that have been captured here, all of that granular metadata are all automatically generated in your format, your branding to use in presentation to stakeholders. So that can be things like, okay, we've collected maybe a SWOT analysis. We've collected competitive details. We've got ourselves a plan on a page. This can all be configured uniquely for each customer. So marketing can start building out the annual plans. They have an integrated sign-off point, and their plans will be focused on those estimated costs. And you're essentially building out, we go back to our plan, what you're building out is that upper layer hierarchy, just like this one. So in the next webinar, I encourage you to join us. That's where we're going to take from this higher level strategic and annual planning into more of a bottoms up tactic planning calendar. That's going to look, to give you a little bit of a sneak preview, let's get out of this. That's going to look a little something like this. It's going to have much more detail around those campaigns, the tactics within those, all the way down to the flights and activation levels. But in order for marketing to be able to build out this level of detail, they need to have their North Star. So the annual planning also be done in Uptempo. This was a very high level demo of the solution. There's certainly more capabilities that we could get into, and we will get into the next webinar. But if anyone wants a more thorough demo or they want some one-on-one time, I'm happy to meet with folks. And I don't know who I'm handing it back over to. Jim, is that you?
It's not me, but thank you, Stephanie. That was a lovely demo. Appreciate it. I think back to Jess.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. All right. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully you guys all walked away with a little bit of inspiration for your 2024 plan or 2025 planning. So it's not so much of an eye roll moment. Please do check in with us. We hope to see you in the next 2 workshops as well. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either Uptempo or Inverta for help with your planning for next year.
I think someone raised their hand. I'm not sure if that was there from before.
It looks like it went away. So I don't think we have a hand raised anymore.
Don't worry about it.
But thank you all again, and we will see you again on the 31st for a not so spooky campaign planning workshop. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.